Welcome back to this quiet space of memory and time. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breathing slow down. Tonight, we are going to explore the long, deep history of Norway during the Second World War. We will walk through every year, every season, and every major turning point from 1940 to 1945. Let the steady rhythm of the words calm your thoughts, leaving no room for daily worries as we journey into the past. Before the storm arrived, Norway was a land defined by peace. For generations, the people of the north had looked to the mountains, the deep fjords, and the vast oceans to build their lives. They were a nation of fishermen, sailors, farmers, and builders. The memory of the First World War was still present, a time when Norway had successfully remained neutral, avoiding the great conflicts of the European continent. As the late 1930s brought rising tensions across Europe, the Norwegian government firmly believed that the same policy of strict neutrality would protect them once again. The military was kept small, focusing primarily on guarding the coastlines rather than preparing for a major invasion. The people wished only to be left alone, to live in harmony with the rugged and beautiful nature that surrounded them. But the world outside was changing rapidly. The strategic position of Norway was far too important for the warring empires to ignore. To the west lay the vast Atlantic Ocean, and to the east lay Sweden and the Soviet Union. For Great Britain, the long Norwegian coastline was a vital shield and a potential pathway to the northern seas. For Germany, Norway represented two crucial advantages. First, it offered direct access to the North Sea, which would prevent the British Royal Navy from blockading German ports as they had done in previous conflicts. Second, and perhaps most importantly, Norway was the transit route for iron ore. During the cold winter months, the northern Swedish mines shipped their vital iron ore through the ice-free port of Narvik in northern Norway. This iron ore was the lifeblood of the German industrial machine. Without it, their factories would slow down, and their campaigns would falter. Thus, the quiet neutrality of Norway became a prize that both sides began to eye with increasing interest. As the winter of 1939 turned into the early months of 1940, the waters off the Norwegian coast became dangerous. British ships monitored the shipping lanes, while German vessels attempted to slip through the territorial waters. The Norwegian Navy, small and under-equipped, tried its best to enforce neutrality, but the forces gathered against them were immense. In the dark hours of early April 1940, the German leadership launched Operation Weserübung. It was a highly secret, incredibly complex naval operation designed to attack multiple Norwegian cities simultaneously. A massive fleet of warships, transports, and soldiers set sail from German ports, moving silently through the North Sea under the cover of fog and darkness. The plan relied entirely on surprise and speed, aiming to capture the political and military centers of Norway before the country could even realize it was at war. On the night of April 8th, the first signs of danger appeared along the southern coast. A German transport ship was torpedoed off the coast of Lillesand, and surviving soldiers in uniform were brought ashore. Yet, the fog of confusion was thick, and the government in Oslo struggled to comprehend the scale of the gathering threat. They hesitated to order a full mobilization of the army, fearing that such a military action might provoke a war they desperately wanted to avoid. That hesitation would shape the days to come. As the clock ticked past midnight into the early morning of April 9, 1940, the German fleet entered the long, narrow fjords of Norway. They struck at 6 main targets all along the coast, stretching from the southern border to the far north. They moved into Oslo, Kristiansand, Stavanger, Bergen, Trondheim, and Narvik. In most of these ports, the surprise was complete. The local defenses, shocked by the sudden appearance of massive warships out of the morning mist, were quickly overwhelmed or cut off from communication. In the Oslofjord, however, the story took a different turn. The capital city was protected by the ancient fortress of Oscarsborg, built on a small island at the narrowest point of the fjord. The fortress was commanded by Colonel Borger Eriksen, a veteran officer who understood the gravity of the moment. As the massive German cruiser Blue Share, the flagship of the invasion fleet, sailed silently through the darkness with its lights extinguished, the lookouts at the fortress spotted the silhouette. The guns of the fortress were old, made in Germany decades prior, and the crew consisted largely of young recruits who had only been training for a short time. Colonel Eriksen faced a terrible choice. He had received no clear orders from the government, and firing upon an unknown fleet could mean starting a catastrophic war. Yet, he knew his duty. He uttered the famous words that he would either be court-martialed or remembered as a hero, and gave the order to fire. At 4:21 in the morning, the heavy guns named Moses and Aaron roared into life. The massive shells struck the Blue Share at close range, causing devastating explosions on the ship. The fortress also launched elderly torpedoes from a hidden underwater station, striking the cruiser squarely in its side. The Blue Share was mortally wounded. It rolled over and sank into the freezing waters of the Drobak Sound, taking hundreds of German soldiers and key administrative staff down with it. The sinking of the Blue Share was a monumental moment. It did not stop the invasion, but it disrupted the German timeline completely. The remaining ships of the fleet turned back down the fjord to land their troops further south, delaying the occupation of Oslo by several crucial hours. This unexpected delay gave the royal family, the members of parliament, and the cabinet the time they needed to act. In the early morning light, a special train pulled out of the Oslo station, carrying King Haakon VII, Crown Prince Olav, the government, and the national gold reserves away from the capital, heading north toward safety. While the leadership escaped, the city of Oslo was occupied later that day by German troops who arrived via transport planes at the nearby airfield. The confusion across the nation was total. In the evening of April 9th, a man named Vidkun Quisling, the leader of a small fascist party in Norway, walked into the studios of the national radio broadcaster. With the German forces backing him, he announced to the nation that the current government had fled, and that he was now the new Prime Minister of Norway. He ordered all military resistance to stop immediately. This radio broadcast shocked and angered the Norwegian people. It turned out to be a massive political mistake for the invaders, as it galvanized the population against the occupation and gave the scattered Norwegian soldiers a clear reason to fight. The king and the government reached the town of Elverum, where the parliament held its final emergency session. They granted the cabinet full power to govern the country from exile if necessary. Shortly after, German emissaries met with King Haakon, demanding that he recognize Quisling as the legal leader of the country. The king refused. In an emotional meeting with his cabinet, he stated that he would rather abdicate the throne for himself and his family than appoint a government that did not have the trust of the Norwegian people. Inspired by the king's resolve, the government rejected the German ultimatum. The response from the sky was immediate. German bombers attacked the small town of Elverum, reducing much of it to ashes, but the king and his circle survived, escaping deeper into the safety of the interior valleys. For the next 2 months, Norway fought a brave but disorganized war. The geography of the country, with its deep valleys, high mountains, and narrow passes, allowed small groups of Norwegian soldiers to hold off much larger German forces. In the valleys of eastern Norway, such as Gudbrandsdalen and Valdres, fierce battles took place. The Norwegian troops, often wearing improvised uniforms and using old rifles, showed incredible marksmanship and courage. However, they lacked heavy artillery, anti-aircraft weapons, and proper communications. One by one, the southern valleys were isolated and forced to surrender as the German army advanced with armored vehicles and air support. In the north, however, the story was very different. The battle for the strategic port of Narvik became a major international conflict. British, French, and Polish troops arrived by sea to support the Norwegian army. Together, they launched a counter-offensive against the German mountain troops led by General Edvard Dietel. The fighting in the snow-covered mountains around Narvik was brutal and exhausting. The Allied forces managed to recapture the town of Narvik, forcing the German troops back toward the Swedish border. This was the first significant territory recaptured from the German army on land during the entire war. But just as victory seemed within reach in the north, disaster struck on the European continent. In May 1940, the German army launched its massive blitzkrieg against France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. The Allied front in France collapsed rapidly. The British and French governments realized they could no longer afford to keep thousands of troops and valuable warships in the remote mountains of Norway. They needed every soldier and every ship to defend their own homelands. The order was given to evacuate all Allied forces from Narvik. This news was a heartbreaking blow to the Norwegian leadership. Without Allied support, they could not maintain the front. On June 7, 1940, exactly 2 months after the invasion began, King Haakon, Crown Prince Olav, and the government boarded the British cruiser Devonshire in the northern city of Tromsø. They left behind a country in deep sorrow, but they took with them the legal authority of the Norwegian state. On June 10, the remaining Norwegian forces in the north signed a capitulation agreement. The military campaign inside the country was officially over, but the war for the soul of Norway had just begun. With the king and government in London, Germany established a strict occupation regime in Norway. Joseph Terboven was appointed as the Reichskommissar, a ruthless administrator who answered directly to Adolf Hitler. Terboven dismissed the Norwegian constitution, banned all political parties except for Quisling's National Unification Party, and took control of the press, the radio, and the courts. He moved into the royal palace in Oslo, symbolizing the complete takeover of the country. The presence of the occupation was overwhelming. Because of Norway's massive coastline and its closeness to Great Britain, the German military feared a counter-invasion throughout the entire war. To prevent this, they stationed an astonishing number of troops in the country. By the middle of the war, there were more than 350,000 German soldiers in Norway. For a native population of only 3 million people, this meant that there was approximately 1 German soldier for every 9 Norwegians. Their presence changed the landscape completely. Hotels, schools, and private homes were requisitioned to house the troops. High fences, watchtowers, and concrete bunkers began to appear along the beautiful beaches and rocky headlands of the coast. The economic impact of the occupation was immediate and severe. Norway's economy was systematically pillaged to support the German war effort. The country was forced to pay for the cost of its own occupation through massive levies on the central bank. Food supplies were redirected to feed the occupying army and the population back in Germany. Soon, the stores emptied, and a strict rationing system was introduced. Every family was issued a ration book, containing small paper coupons for basic necessities like bread, sugar, coffee, milk, and meat. The amounts allowed were tiny, barely enough to sustain a working adult. True coffee disappeared entirely, replaced by a bitter substitute made from roasted rye, barley, or chicory. Meat became a rare luxury, seen only on special occasions. Clothing, shoes, and fuel for heating were almost impossible to find through legal channels. The winter months became a time of deep physical discomfort, as homes were cold and clothes were worn thin. In response to these shortages, the Norwegian people showed incredible resourcefulness. People transformed their lawns and public parks into gardens to grow potatoes and vegetables. Every spare patch of earth in cities like Oslo, Bergen, and Trondheim was used to cultivate food. People learned to raise rabbits on balconies for meat and secretly trade goods with relatives who lived on farms in the countryside. A vast underground economy emerged, where items like eggs, butter, and wool were bartered in secret, away from the watchful eyes of the economic police. As the years of occupation dragged on, the German authorities attempted to reshape Norwegian society into a model National Socialist state. They believed that the Norwegian people, being of Nordic heritage, would easily accept their ideology. They were completely wrong. The attempt to Nazify the institutions of the country met with a wall of quiet, stubborn, and highly organized civil resistance. One of the most significant battles of the civil resistance took place within the school system. In 1942, Vidkun Quisling, who had been given the title of minister-president by the Germans, decreed that all teachers must join a new fascist teachers' union and incorporate National Socialist ideology into their lessons. He also declared that all children aged 10 to 18 must join a youth organization similar to the Hitler Youth. The reaction from the teachers was immediate and unanimous. Across the country, thousands of teachers wrote identical letters of protest, refusing to participate in the destruction of the minds of their students. They stood before their classes and told the children that they would remain true to their calling as educators of free thought. Furious at this defiance, Terboven ordered the arrest of over 1,000 male teachers. They were packed into overcrowded cattle cars and shipped to a brutal prison camp in Kirkenes, in the far frozen north of the country. There, they were subjected to hard labor, starvation, and freezing temperatures. Yet, despite the immense suffering, very few gave in. Their sacrifice inspired the entire nation. Parents wrote letters of protest, and the schools remained centers of quiet defiance. Eventually, realizing that he could not run a country with all its teachers in prison camps, the regime backed down, and the teachers returned home as heroes. A similar struggle occurred within the Church of Norway. The country's bishops and the vast majority of its pastors resigned from their state positions in protest against the regime's brutality and its interference in religious matters. They refused to accept state salaries, but continued to preach from their pulpits, delivering sermons that subtly but clearly condemned the hatred and injustice of the occupation. The churches became crowded sanctuaries where people gathered to find spiritual strength and solidarity. Even in everyday public life, ordinary citizens found quiet ways to show their loyalty to the king and their rejection of the invaders. People began to wear small, everyday objects as symbols of resistance. For a time, wearing a simple metal paperclip on a coat lapel became a sign that meant we are bound together against the enemy. When the authorities realized the meaning of the paperclip and banned it, people started wearing red woolen caps, which were a traditional symbol of freedom in the countryside. The police began arresting people just for the color of their hats, which only served to show the absurdity and desperation of the occupying regime. On public trams and buses, if a German soldier sat down next to a Norwegian, the Norwegian would often stand up and move away, maintaining a cold, silent distance that the soldiers found deeply unnerving. While civil resistance kept the spirit of the nation alive, a secret military resistance was growing in the deep shadows of the Norwegian landscape. This organization was known as Milorg, short for Military Organization. In the early years, Milorg focused on building a secret army that could support an Allied liberation of the country. It was an incredibly dangerous enterprise. The country was filled with informers and monitored by the Gestapo, the feared German secret police. Young men and women who joined Milorg lived double lives. By day, they were ordinary office workers, students, or laborers. By night, they slipped into the deep pine forests and remote mountain plateaus. They built hidden cabins, known as cells, where they stored weapons, ammunition, and radio equipment. These supplies were flown in from Great Britain by the Royal Air Force, dropped by parachute into the dark wilderness on nights when the moon was bright. The Milorg volunteers had to trek for miles through deep snow to collect these containers, hiding them in caves or buried under the earth before the German patrols could discover them. The British Special Operations Executive, or SOE, created a special unit consisting entirely of Norwegian volunteers who had escaped to Britain. This unit was known as Norwegian Independent Company 1, or more famously, Company Linge, named after its brave founder Captain Martin Linge, who died in an early raid. The men of Company Linge were trained in Scotland in the arts of sabotage, guerrilla warfare, and secret communications. They were dropped back into Norway by parachute or smuggled across the stormy North Sea on small fishing boats to carry out high-risk missions against strategic targets. The connection between Britain and Norway was maintained by a legendary operation known as the Shetland Bus. This was a secret transport line run by Norwegian sailors using ordinary wooden fishing boats. They sailed from the Shetland Islands, north of Scotland, across the treacherous waters of the North Sea to the western coast of Norway. They sailed during the dark, stormy nights of winter to avoid German maritime patrols and airplanes. These brave sailors smuggled ammunition, radios, and saboteurs into Norway, and carried back refugees, downed Allied pilots, and resistance fighters who were hunted by the Gestapo. The conditions on these small boats were terrifying, with freezing waves, heavy gales, and the constant threat of enemy attack. Many boats were lost, and many men perished in the cold sea, but the Shetland bus never stopped running. Later in the war, the operation was upgraded with fast, armed American submarine chasers, which made the crossing much safer and more efficient. The most critical and famous chapter of the secret war in Norway took place in the dramatic landscape of Telemark. The global war effort was entered into a race for scientific dominance, and the remote town of Rjukan became the center of world attention. Nestled in a deep valley, the Vimork hydroelectric plant was the only facility in Europe capable of producing heavy water, a rare substance that German scientists needed for their research into building an atomic bomb. The Allies knew that if Germany succeeded in developing nuclear weapons, the war would be lost. The heavy water production at Vimork had to be stopped at all costs. The first attempt to destroy the plant, known as Operation Freshman, ended in absolute tragedy. 2 British gliders carrying Royal Engineers crashed in the harsh mountains of Telemark due to bad weather and icing. The survivors were captured by the German forces and executed under Hitler's notorious commando order. The tragedy sent a shockwave through the Allied command, but it also alerted the German military, who heavily reinforced the defenses around the Vimork plant, adding landmines, searchlights, and extra guards. Despite the increased danger, a second attempt was planned, relying this time on the stealth and local knowledge of Norwegian commandos from Company Lynch. A small team, led by the young and brilliant Joachim Ronneberg, parachuted onto the frozen Hardangervidda plateau in the dead of winter. They survived for weeks in the brutal cold, eating wild reindeer meat and waiting for the perfect moment. On the night of February 27, 1943, the team moved out. They decided against attacking the heavily guarded bridge over the deep, rocky gorge that protected the factory. Instead, they performed an impossible physical feat. They climbed down the steep, icy cliff into the bottom of the gorge, crossed the half-frozen river, and climbed up the sheer rock face on the other side, approaching the factory from an unexpected direction. Using information provided by a sympathetic engineer inside the plant, they found a secret entrance through a cable tunnel. They slipped inside the heavy water facility without alerting the guards. They quickly placed their explosive charges directly on the heavy water production cells. Ronneberg shortened the fuses to ensure the explosion would happen before the guards could intervene, even though it meant they would have less time to escape. They lit the fuses and ran. As they emerged into the cold night air, a muffled explosion echoed through the industrial complex. The heavy water cells were completely destroyed, and thousands of liters of the precious fluid poured down the drains. The team escaped into the dark mountains just as the alarms began to blare. 5 of the commandos skied for over 200 miles across the rugged wilderness of Norway to the safety of the Swedish border, while others remained in the mountains to support the local resistance. The mission was a brilliant success, accomplished without a single loss of life, and it dealt a devastating blow to the German nuclear program. When the German authorities attempted to rebuild the facility and ship the remaining stocks of heavy water to Germany, the resistance struck again. In February 1944, Knut Hauklid, another brave member of Company Lynch, managed to place a time bomb in the hull of the train ferry Hydro, which was carrying the heavy water containers across the deep waters of Lake Tingsjø. The ferry sank into the depths of the lake, ensuring that the dangerous cargo would never reach its destination. As the war entered its later stages, the pressure inside the occupied territory increased. The Gestapo, led by the brutal Heinrich Fellis, intensified its efforts to crush the resistance. Torture became standard practice at the Gestapo headquarters at Victoria Terrace in Oslo. Anyone suspected of helping the resistance faced imprisonment in camps like Grini near Oslo, or deportation to the horrific concentration camps in Germany. Entire villages suffered for the actions of the resistance. In the small fishing village of Televag on the western coast, after 2 Gestapo officers were killed in a shootout with resistance fighters, the German authorities retaliated with extreme brutality. All the houses in the village were burned down, the boats were destroyed, the men were sent to concentration camps where many died, and the women and children were imprisoned for the duration of the war. The year 1944 brought significant changes to the global conflict, and the echoes were felt deeply in the north. In the autumn of that year, the Soviet Red Army launched a massive offensive against the German forces in the Arctic. They pushed across the border from the east, liberating the northern town of Kirkenes in October 1944. It was the first piece of Norwegian territory to be freed from Nazi rule. As the German 20th Mountain Army retreated from the far north, they carried out a brutal and total scorched earth policy under the orders of General Lothar Rendulic. They were determined to leave nothing behind that could be used by the advancing Soviet forces. As they marched south, they systematically burned every house, school, church, barn, and pier in the regions of Finnmark and northern Troms. Over 11,000 houses, 4,000 barns, and hundreds of bridges and schools were reduced to ashes. The infrastructure of an entire region was completely erased from the map. The population of the north, numbering over 40,000 people, was ordered to evacuate to the south immediately. It was a human tragedy of immense proportions. Families were forced to leave their ancestral homes with only what they could carry, marching through the bitter cold of the Arctic winter. Yet, thousands refused to obey the evacuation order. They hid in the dark, frozen wilderness, living in damp caves, under overturned boats, or in improvised turf huts through the long, sunless polar night, waiting for the relief units of the Norwegian government in exile to arrive from Britain and Sweden. Down in the south, the resistance braced for the final chapter of the war. Milorg, which had grown to an army of over 40,000 trained fighters, shifted its focus to active sabotage. They targeted the railway lines, factories, and fuel depots that the German military needed to move troops and supplies back to the defense of Germany. Under the leadership of figures like Gunnar Sonsteby, the famous number 24, the Oslo detachment carried out daring daylight operations, destroying passport offices to disrupt the mobilization of Norwegian youth for forced labor, and blowing up vital train engines. By the early months of 1945, it was clear to everyone that the German Empire was collapsing. Yet, the situation in Norway remained tense and dangerous. There were still nearly 400,000 heavily armed German troops in the country, and there was a real fear that the fanatical leadership might decide to turn Norway into a final fortress, fighting to the bitter end amidst the mountains and fjords. But reason and the overwhelming weight of history prevailed. On May 7, 1945, the news arrived that Germany had signed an unconditional surrender at Reims in France. The official surrender of the German forces in Norway was scheduled for midnight on May 8. As the hour struck, the long night of 5 years came to a sudden, joyful end. The relief and happiness that swept across the country was a wave of pure emotion. The streets of every town and village, quiet and grey for so long, suddenly filled with hundreds of thousands of people. Flags that had been hidden away in secret compartments, under floorboards, or sewn inside cushions for 5 years were brought out into the bright spring sunshine. The air was filled with the sounds of cheering, singing, and tears of joy. The transformation was immediate. The brave fighters of Milorg emerged from the forests, wearing their simple armbands and carrying their weapons openly, taking control of public buildings and ensuring a peaceful transition of power. The German soldiers, following their orders, laid down their arms and moved into designated camp areas without offering resistance. Vidkun Quisling and his ministers were arrested, to be tried by the restored courts of a free democracy. On May 13th, Crown Prince Olav arrived in Oslo, welcomed by an unforgettable sea of people. And on June 7, 1945, exactly 5 years to the day after he had been forced to flee into exile, King Haakon VII returned to his capital. As his ship sailed up the Oslofjord, past the old fortress of Oscarsborg that had bought the nation its freedom 5 years earlier, the guns fired a joyful salute. The king stepped ashore onto the harbor of Oslo, greeted by a nation that had remained true to him, true to itself, and true to the ideals of freedom. The war was over. The task of rebuilding was immense. The north lay in ashes, the economy was broken, and many brave sailors, soldiers, and citizens would never return to their families. But the peace had returned to the deep valleys, the quiet mountains, and the endless seas of Norway. The strength that had carried the nation through the dark years would now rebuild it, stronger and more united than ever before. Now, let the stories of the past rest. The history is written, the peace is won, and the world around